History books often tell us that countries are conquered by armies, by weapons, by technology, and by overwhelming military power. But sometimes, the greatest defense a country can have is something no army can easily defeat: the sea. There is an island off the coast of Europe where every invading army faces the same problem. Before it can fight the country, it must first find a way to reach it. This is England. For centuries, powerful armies have looked across the water toward its shores. Some came with enormous armies. Others possessed powerful weapons, experienced soldiers, and fleets capable of crossing great distances. But England presented a different kind of challenge. It was not simply a country that an army could march into. There was no land border connecting it directly to the armies of continental Europe. No invading force could simply cross a frontier, move inland, and begin its campaign. Before an army could fight for England, it first had to cross the sea. And that single fact changed everything. An invading force needed ships to transport its soldiers. It needed to carry weapons, food, ammunition, horses, and equipment. It needed favorable weather. It needed a safe landing. And even after reaching the English coast, the army would still have to survive in unfamiliar territory while maintaining its connection to everything it had left behind across the water. This meant that England's greatest natural defense was not a fortress. It was not a wall. It was not a mountain range. It was the distance between the island and the armies that wanted to conquer it. But the sea was only the beginning, because England was never impossible to conquer. History proved that. The Romans reached its shores. The Vikings crossed the seas. And in 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, successfully invaded and established Norman rule over England. But every successful invasion revealed the same truth. Reaching England was one challenge. Maintaining an army there was another. Because once an invading force crossed the water, the sea that had protected England suddenly became the same sea that separated the army from its supplies, reinforcements, and homeland. The geography of England created a problem that every invader had to solve. How do you cross the water? How do you land an army? And how do you keep that army alive once the invasion has begun? Because before you could conquer England, you first had to reach the island. For an invading army, the greatest challenge was not always what waited on the other side of the battlefield. Sometimes, it was the journey required to reach it. Between England and the European mainland lies the English Channel, a stretch of water that has shaped the history of invasion for centuries. On a map it may appear narrow, but moving an entire army across it is a very different problem. An army does not travel alone. It needs food. It needs weapons. It needs ammunition. It needs horses, equipment, and supplies. And all of these things must somehow cross the water with the soldiers who depend on them. For a small force, crossing the channel might be possible. But an invasion is different. Thousands of soldiers need to arrive. Ships must be organized. Supplies must be loaded. Troops must be transported. And the entire operation depends on something no commander can fully control: the sea. Weather can change within hours. Winds can alter the course of a fleet. Storms can scatter ships across the water. And a landing that was carefully planned can suddenly become dangerous or impossible. But even if an invading force successfully crossed the channel, the problem did not end there. The army still needed to land. It needed a secure position on the coast. It needed to move inland. And most importantly, it needed to keep its supply lines open. Because once an army crossed the sea, every soldier became dependent on a connection that stretched back across the water. Food had to arrive. Weapons had to arrive. Reinforcements had to arrive. And if that connection was broken, the invading army could quickly find itself isolated in a foreign country. This was the hidden challenge of invading England. The sea was not simply an obstacle that had to be crossed once. It was a permanent barrier between the invading army and everything it needed to survive. And England's defenders understood this. An invading force could be powerful on land, but if its ships could not move freely, if its supplies could not reach the shore, and if reinforcements could not cross the channel, that power could begin to disappear. This is why the English Channel became more than just a stretch of water. It became a natural defensive system, one that forced every potential invader to solve the same problem. How do you move an entire army across the sea land it safely, supply it, and keep it fighting. Throughout history, some armies found the answer, but others discovered that the sea could become their greatest enemy. And eventually, one of the most important invasions in English history would prove that crossing the Channel was possible. In 1066, William of Normandy would successfully bring an invading army across the water. But reaching England was only the beginning. The real challenge was what came next. For centuries, the sea had stood between England and the armies of continental Europe, but in 1066, one invading force successfully crossed it. The invasion was led by William, Duke of Normandy. He assembled an army and a fleet across the Channel and prepared for one of the most important military campaigns in English history. And this time, the crossing succeeded. William's forces landed in southern England, but reaching the island was only the beginning, because an invading army that lands on a foreign shore faces a new problem. It has to fight. In October 1066, William's army met the forces of King Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. The English army held a strong defensive position on high ground. The Norman forces attacked repeatedly. The battle was difficult, but eventually, the Norman army broke through the English defense. King Harold was killed, and the balance of power in England changed forever. But the Battle of Hastings did not mean that England had suddenly become easy to control. William had won a decisive battle, but he still had to conquer a country. His army had to secure territory. It had to establish control over important towns and strongholds, and it had to overcome resistance. The invasion had succeeded because William had solved the first great problem. He had crossed the sea. But now another problem appeared. How do you keep an army supplied and maintain control over a country after the invasion has already begun? William eventually established Norman rule over England. But the events of 1066 revealed something important about invading an island. The sea may be the first barrier, but it is not the last. An invading army can cross the water, it can win a battle, it can capture territory, but to truly conquer a country, it must remain there. It requires supplies, it requires reinforcements, and it requires the ability to survive long after the first battle is over. The Norman Conquest proved that England could be invaded, but it also showed just how much an invading force had to overcome to turn a successful landing into lasting control. And centuries later, another powerful force would attempt to reach England. This time, the invasion fleet would be enormous. But once again, the sea would become part of the battlefield. More than 5 centuries after the Norman Conquest, another powerful force prepared to cross the sea toward England. This time, the threat came from one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe, Spain. In 1588, King Philip II of Spain launched the Spanish Armada as part of a plan to support an invasion of England. The plan was ambitious. The Armada would cross the English Channel and help create the conditions for Spanish forces to land in England. But once again, the same problem appeared: the sea. The English knew that they did not necessarily have to defeat the entire Spanish force in one single battle. They needed to prevent the invasion from succeeding. English ships harassed the Armada as it moved through the Channel. Then, at Calais, the English launched fireships against the Spanish fleet. The attack scattered the Armada and disrupted its formation. The following battle at Gravelines caused further damage, but the Spanish fleet was still a powerful force. The real disaster came as the Armada was forced to retreat north. Instead of returning directly through the Channel, the fleet sailed around Scotland and Ireland. And then the weather turned against it. Powerful winds and storms battered the fleet. Ships were damaged. Others were driven onto dangerous coastlines. Many never returned to Spain. In England, these winds were celebrated as a providential sign. Some called them the Protestant wind. The name reflected the belief that God himself had intervened to protect Protestant England from invasion. But behind the symbolism was a more complicated reality. The Armada had already faced English naval attacks. Its invasion plan had been disrupted, and the weather then made the retreat even more disastrous. The invasion had failed. But the Spanish Armada revealed something that had been true since the Norman Conquest. An army could be powerful, a fleet could be enormous, a plan could be carefully prepared. But when the target was an island, the sea was always part of the battlefield, and the sea could not be controlled completely. Centuries later, England would face another potential invasion threat. But by then, England was no longer the political entity that had existed in 1588. In 1707, England and Scotland had been united into the Kingdom of Great Britain, and it was this new British state that would face the threat of Napoleon Bonaparte. At the height of his power, Napoleon controlled much of continental Europe. Across the Channel stood Britain. Napoleon understood the problem. To invade Britain, he first needed control of the sea. His armies could dominate land, but they could not simply march across the Channel. Ships had to transport soldiers, the fleet had to survive, and the invasion force had to reach Britain before the defenders could stop it. In 1805, the Battle of Trafalgar became a decisive moment. The British Royal Navy defeated the combined French and Spanish fleets. The victory did not make Britain impossible to attack, but it made Napoleon's planned invasion far more difficult. Without the naval control needed to protect a large-scale crossing of the Channel, moving an invasion army from the continent to Britain became an enormous risk. The invasion never happened. And once again, the same fundamental problem remained. An enemy could dominate the European mainland. But Britain was separated from that mainland by the sea. The weapons had changed, the armies had grown more powerful, but the geography had not. The sea still stood between the invader and the island. And that meant every invasion plan had to begin with the same question. How do you cross the water and survive what waits on the other side? There is something every invading army needs, no matter how powerful it is: food, weapons, ammunition, reinforcements, and the ability to move all of them where they are needed. Because an army does not fight on soldiers alone, it fights on logistics. And when the battlefield is an island, logistics become even more complicated. Imagine an invading army landing on the coast of England. The soldiers have arrived, the ships have crossed the Channel, the first battle has been fought. But now, the army has to move inland, and every soldier creates another demand behind him. Every soldier needs food and water, every weapon needs ammunition, every wounded soldier needs medical care, and every new battle creates the need for more supplies. On the European mainland, an invading army could potentially move supplies over land, but an army that had crossed the Channel depended on a connection that stretched back across the water. Ships had to continue moving, supplies had to cross the Channel, reinforcements had to arrive, and the route between the army and its homeland had to remain open. This created a fundamental problem. The farther an invading army moved into England, the more difficult it could become to keep everything it needed flowing behind it. And if the sea route was disrupted, the army could quickly become isolated. This was the hidden battle of invasion. Not always the battle you see on the battlefield, but the battle happening behind it. The fight to keep the army supplied, the fight to keep the ships moving, the fight to bring reinforcements across the water, and the fight to maintain control over a country while an entire sea stood between the army and its homeland. This is why an invasion of England was never simply about winning one battle. It was about sustaining an entire military operation. The Norman Conquest demonstrated that an army could cross the Channel and establish control. The Spanish Armada demonstrated how naval warfare and weather could destroy the conditions required for an invasion. And Napoleon's experience demonstrated the importance of controlling the sea before attempting a large-scale crossing. After the 1707 Union, this became a problem faced by Great Britain rather than England alone. And the lesson remained the same. An army could prepare for war, it could gather soldiers, it could build weapons, it could plan an invasion. But it still needed a way to cross the sea, land safely, and keep its supply lines open. Because distance was not just distance, it was time, it was ships, it was supplies, it was manpower, and eventually it could become exhaustion. An invading army could reach the island, it could win battles, but could it stay? Could it keep thousands of soldiers supplied? Could it continue receiving reinforcements? Could it maintain control while the sea separated it from everything it needed? That was the real challenge. Because occupying territory is one thing, maintaining control is another. And the geography of the British Isles made that second task far more difficult for any army arriving from the continent. The sea that protected the island also created a permanent logistical problem for anyone who tried to conquer it. And that is where England's geography became more than a barrier. It became a war of endurance. Because before an invading army could truly control the island, it first had to solve the problem that every invader faced. How do you cross the sea and keep the army alive after you arrive? England teaches us one of the most important lessons in military history. Sometimes, a country's greatest defense is not its army. Sometimes, it is the land itself, or in England's case, the water around it. Throughout history, powerful armies looked across the sea toward England. The Romans came. The Vikings crossed the seas. The Normans invaded and conquered. Spain attempted to create the conditions for an invasion. And centuries later, Napoleon prepared for the possibility of crossing the Channel against Britain. The weapons changed. The armies changed. The technology changed. But one problem remained the same. To fight in England, you first had to reach England. And after 1707, to launch a major invasion of Great Britain, the same fundamental challenge remained. You had to cross the sea. You had to land your soldiers. You had to bring your weapons and supplies with you. And then, after all of that, you still had to conquer and control the country itself. This was the hidden advantage of being an island. An invading army could not simply march across a land border. It could not bring an entire army into England with a single road. Every soldier, every weapon, every horse, and every piece of equipment had to cross the water. And once the army arrived, the same sea that had protected the island became the distance separating the invaders from their homeland. Supplies had to cross it. Reinforcements had to cross it. And if control of the sea was lost, an invading army could suddenly find itself alone in a foreign country. England was never impossible to conquer. History proved that. But conquering England required something more than military strength. It required the ability to overcome geography, to control the sea, to land an army, to keep it supplied, and then to maintain control over a country protected by the water for centuries. Maybe that is the greatest lesson of England. Sometimes the strongest defense a country can have is not the weapon in its hands. It is the distance between itself and the army that wants to conquer it. The island did not make England invincible, but it forced every invader to solve the same problem before the war could truly begin. How do you reach it? How do you stay? And how do you keep fighting once the sea is between you and home? So, what do you think makes a country truly difficult to conquer? Mountains? Jungles? Deserts? Oceans? Or perhaps the ability of a country to use its geography to turn an invading army's greatest strength into its greatest weakness? Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Mythic Wildlife for more cinematic documentaries exploring the world's most extraordinary places and the incredible stories hidden within them. In the next episode, we're heading to another country where nature itself seems to have built a fortress. I'm Ask Studio. Thank you for joining me on this journey from Mythic Wildlife. Until next time, may the power of nature be with you. Stay curious, and remember, before you can conquer an island, you first have to reach it.